Good morning, everyone. After closing a real estate transaction in New York City, buyers should be prepared for several important steps as they transition into their new home. First, they must complete any final paperwork with the building's management company, including updating records, providing proof of insurance, and setting up monthly maintenance or common charges. Many co-ops and condos also require new owners to schedule a move-in date in advance, often with designated time slots and elevator reservations. Some buildings may charge a move-in fee or require a security deposit to cover potential damages during the move. Establishing a relationship with the building's resident manager and staff is essential, as they play a key role in daily operations, maintenance, and handling any immediate concerns. Supers can assist with minor repairs, emergencies, and understanding the building's systems, while doormen or concierge services help manage deliveries, security, and guest access. It's also a good idea to engage with any residents and resident associations or building events, fostering a sense of community. By staying organized and proactive, new homeowners can settle into their New York City residence seamlessly, and they can enjoy their new environment. And with me at the table today is Dylan Pichulik, XL Property Management, and he is a new podcast host on this More Network, and his show is called Managing Manhattan, so you must listen to it. It's a good show, and he joins me now to discuss. But first, let me welcome my listeners and viewers from across the United States and all around the globe. I am Vince Rocco, and this is Talking New York Real Estate. So as always, let's go behind the headlines and inside real estate, the state of our industry.
Hey, it's Stephen Bailey from Roadway Moving and Storage. As an official moving partner of Brown Harris Stevens, we know that your clients deserve more than just a move. At Roadway Moving and Storage, we turn moving into an experience they will love. From specialized services to a white glove treatment, we've got it all covered. When you choose Roadway, you're choosing a peace of mind for your clients. Plus, our referral program is the most rewarding in the industry. Want to learn more? Shoot me an email at steven@roadwaymoving.com or visit roadwaymoving.com.
Okay, everybody, we are back, and a really exciting show today. We had a couple of cancellations this morning, which is fine. But this gives me the opportunity to introduce Dylan. He's not new to the show. He's been on the show before. But he is new to our network more. He does his own podcast now, weekly?
It's a monthly podcast.
Monthly podcast called Managing Manhattan. And before we get into our topic today, where we're going to talk about everything that happens post-closing. You know, we work with buyers, we work with sellers, we work with renters, whatever. But everybody always has the same questions. For me as an agent, what do I do after the buy transaction is done and now it's time to move into a building? I've either never lived in New York before, or I've never lived in that building before. Tell me what it is all about. It's different than living in a private house where you kind of call your own shots and do your own thing. But before we get into all that, I want to ask Dylan about Managing Manhattan. So welcome, first of all, to the More Network. You've come highly recommended.
Thank you, Vince.
Everybody here is excited to have you. And he's doing a great job. But tell us what the show, the show concept is, and what you think it should turn out to be or morph into as more time goes on.
Absolutely. No, I was excited to be introduced with the idea of doing a show on the More Network because we finally get to tell the story from the landlord's perspective. And, XL, as you know, concentrates mostly on residential assets, and you get a lot of broker opinions, you get a lot of developer opinions, but you never really hear the perspective of the landlord, especially as it relates to the residential community. And, I wanted to offer guidance and support and suggestions on how to make smoother transactions, decodify all this new legislation that's been thrown at landlords. It's really an exciting opportunity to share what we see out there.
So, and great information, because we touch on it sometimes here on the show, most especially when you're on. But again, most people out there, when they come into the New York market to buy and to live, even on the rental side, they don't really understand what it takes to be successful. And I think, part of what I want to try and get done today is talk about how you can be successful when you move into a building in New York City, whether it's rental, whether you bought something, whatever. So who becomes the most challenging in all of the people that you talked about, the landlord, the agents, the tenants, or the buyers? Who, from an XL property management perspective, or any managing agent, who becomes the most challenging on a day-to-day basis in a building? I'm sure you can say all of them.
Well, I was going to say that.
Right.
From the management perspective, everybody. I mean, everybody has different agendas. Everybody has different personalities. There's, a severe lack of knowledge on the buyer side as well. Like, they've come from outside of New York. They either a small city or from somewhere outside the United States, and they have no idea of like policies and procedures and, how to act right when you're a new buyer in a building and, the new kid in town and what the expectation is. People don't know what to do. And then you get into these strict condo and co-op buildings where they're just lined to the rim with, procedure, and they get paralyzed. So like, I don't know how to do this.
Well, as I said in the opening at the top of the show, it is wise for anybody coming into a building, let's talk about a buyer, to get to know the building super or resident manager, as they're called today, the door staff, the other staff members who work in the building, but also your neighbors and the board members and the associations that might be, part of what a building is. Because my opinion is, if you want to be successful in a building, you have to kind of be out there, in there, and have everybody know who you are. And a lot of people say to me, but I don't really want to talk to people. I get in the elevator and I put my head down, and that's a New York thing, I get it. But if you want to live successfully in a building, I think it's up to us as residents to kind of know people. And your first point of contact is, before they get to you, the first point of contact is going to be the resident manager, right?
Yeah.
So how do you, as the managing agent, the CEO of a company, how do you deal with the supers or the resident? Do you hire them and put them in specific buildings where you think they're going to do good or not?
Yeah, I mean, our model's different, so we're not necessarily managing buildings with live-in supers, that kind of thing, but we have to we operate out of everyone's building. Excel operates out of about 300 different condo buildings at this point, and co-op buildings, and we've learned your best friend in the building has to be the super. And you can't, as a new tenant or owner, go in there both barrels blasting because you don't like whatever policy and disregarding the rules. You will easily find yourself in a lot of hot water. The super can make things incredibly inconvenient for you. You want to be friends with them. And so, and that's priority number one, because they're the ones determining policies and procedures. The board, the tougher they are, the more the board seems to like these kind of characters. And so you want them to be friends. Otherwise, if you're not friends with them, they're going to be against you, and you don't want that.
Can you talk a little bit about, for those who don't live in Manhattan or understand what living in a building is about, can you talk a little bit about what the building staff across the board responsibility is, including your own staff, where you are, in a building?
When in regards to the super, the whole building staff,
the whole building staff,
and the super really is kind of the brainchild of the building. I mean, he runs a show. We use a lot of people use the term super and resident manager interchangeably. Every building is different in how it's set up, but the super resident manager is really kind of the head of the building at the building level. Below him, you have doorman, you have porters, you have handyman. Sometimes you have elevator guys in the elevator for some of the old school, old world charm buildings.
I don't miss those. When I first moved into my building 22 years ago already, we had the doormen in the elevators, and I hated it, because in the morning when you get in and you're kind of like still doing this, and they're like, "Good morning, Vince." I'm like, yee.
You're already stressed out, ready to think about the day. I was actually in one yesterday.
I don't really feel like talking, I didn't even have my coffee yet.
I was in one yesterday morning, and it still had the elevator guy, and I'm like, is this still working for society? I get it. It's so charming. In some cases, in the morning, I'm a disaster. I've gone to the gym.
Totally.
I've had to walk the dog. We've already had 6 awkward interactions between me coming out and going in.
Exactly.
But do we still need that? Isn't it easier just to push the button? Isn't it less expensive for the building? Ultimately, after you modernize the elevator, just push the button. The computer knows better than we do.
Well, my happiest day came about a year after I moved into the building, when they modernized the elevator, and the doormen were taken out into the lobby, behind the desk. And in the beginning, they were so uncomfortable with that. They didn't know how to handle that. And I remember the first couple of days, one of the guys in particular, he's still there all these years later. He'd say, "But I'd rather be in the elevator." I'm like, "No, we'd rather you be right where you are, not in the elevator." He used to laugh at that. And every once in a while, I still tease him about that. But he loved it because he felt like it was the intimate opportunity to talk to me and this one and that one. Because sometimes people just fly past the door staff in the lobby, and don't acknowledge, which I think is rude. but there's a whole bunch of things. But the building staff actually runs everything. Not only just the doorman, but the super, the porter, the handyman. How do your guys? What do you do at XL Property Management in a building? What is your main responsibility in a building?
Look, your main responsibility is really to take care of the building as a whole. And, we don't manage condominium co-op buildings. We do manage rental assets. But, for those that do manage condo and co-op buildings, the building staff is really focused on the building needs. What's happening in the hallways, what's happening in the elevators, what's happening on the sidewalk, the facade. They're not really there to handle unit owner needs and what's happening within the apartment itself. Some buildings are more hands-on than others. Some will do more for you, but really their whole purpose is to make the building run, not the apartment run. That's a whole nother animal. The owner's responsible for that.
Right.
They will stop the bleeding if there's a leak, if there's whatever happening. They're there to help stop the bleeding so it doesn't affect the building. But people oftentimes think, okay, the super's supposed to help me, but if it's a condo or co-op, the answer is really no. You're supposed to help yourself,
I wanted to get into that. A lot of buildings, most buildings have issues, and all the buildings I've lived in New York City, I've been lucky, fortunately, but there have been some issues. And so what I wanted to have you help explain and make the audience understand, who's responsible for what? There's a water leak. Like you said, there's a difference between condo and co-op ownership. So it would be the owner. But in a rental asset, it's really the landlord of the entire building. So where does responsibility lie if you wake up and your plumbing isn't working, or your toilet is backed up, or your shower water isn't going down, whatever. What do you do?
Absolutely.
And people ask me these questions all the time. Who do I call if something goes wrong? Right.
Yeah. Look, if it's a rental building, then the landlord's ultimately responsible for all of that. So the building owner, the landlord's management company, they're responsible for taking care of any maintenance and repair items within not only the building itself, but the apartments. In a condo or co-op building, it's a little more, it's not necessarily gray, but it depends on the issue and what it is. If there's water flooding from above, if it's, they're there to stop the bleeding and figure out what's the source of the actual problem. So if it's because, I'm in 2B and 3B is flooding into me because, a pipe broke in the apartment, then, if it's a unit owner pipe, like it's, they define that as it's off the main branch line of the building, then the unit owner is responsible for getting that repaired. If the heat's not working and it's not the PTAC issue, but rather the boiler in the basement that's causing the problem, then it's the building's responsibility to resolve. So it's really not as clear cut in a lot of cases, but anything that's equipment of the owner, piping of the owner, electrical lines of the owner, that's an owner responsibility. And if it's a building problem, it's because base building like risers or boiler or water tower is causing the problem, then it's the building.
And we also know that people are people, or people will be people, and not everybody is always satisfied. For example, a couple of weeks ago, I walked out of my building in the morning to go to work, and my doorman said, "How was your apartment? Is it cold?" And I'm like, "It's really interesting that you asked me that question. Actually, it is." And it was during one of those weeks where it was like freezing cold. He said, "I'm getting a lot of phone calls." From people living in the building that their apartments are cold. And I said, well, what's the problem? And I thought maybe it's my radiator. I live in a pre-war, so I have, steam heat, whatever. But I kept pushing up against it, and it was cold. And he said, well, the managing agent, who shall remain nameless, decided that they were spending too much money heating the building, so they're testing, turning it off at certain points. And I'm like, when it's 10 degrees outside, you don't turn it off. Okay, hello. It was cold. A day later, we were back to normal and haven't had that problem since, because I think people were up in arms over that. I get expenses, and I wanted to get into a little bit about that after the break, but I get the expenses, and we talked a little bit about this before the show went on the air, that things have escalated price-wise in an insane manner. I mean, I don't even understand it. I mean, from a individual perspective, things are crazy, but you have to think about buildings. So when we come back, we're going to talk about all of that. And I also want to ask Dylan, because he manages a lot of rental buildings and rental assets, where do we stand with rent control, rent stabilized, and free market rent tenants in a building, and how are landlords, better handling all of that? And a little bit about how you move into a building. All of that when we come back. This is Talking New York Real Estate on the More Network. Don't go anywhere.
This beautiful set here at Studio 1873 is brought to you by the Everset. The Everset provides full-service staging and furniture rental solutions in the New York area. For more information, please visit us at staging.theeverset.com or email us at staging@theeverset.com to request a free proposal.
All right, everybody, we are back with Dylan Pichulik from Excel Property Management and also the new host of a podcast called Managing Manhattan here on the More Network, so check it out. I wanted to talk a little bit about the rental buildings that you work in. We have in this town still a lot of old, what I call old-time rent-controlled apartments, rent-stabilized apartments, and then free market rent apartments where people who are renting today brand new into a building pay whatever market rate is, right? And today, rents are very high. But we have people who are living in building 50 years, 60 years, 20 years, and they fall into either a rent control or a rent stabilized position where their rents are much lower and they can only be increased a certain amount each year. What, in the buildings that you are familiar with, what is the ratio these days between control, stabilized, and free rent?
Look, for the most part, Excel is a higher-end landlord, so we manage a lot of free market units, but we also have tons of rent-stabilized and rent-controlled apartments in our buildings. And as you may recall, and I talk about this a lot, anybody who hears me speak, the 2019 rent laws changed the game for landlords. Because on the rent control side...
Yes, explain that, because that's important.
Yeah, so basically in 2019, we did a massive overhaul of all the rent laws. Nobody really knew it was coming. These laws were kind of passed in the middle of the night. They changed the whole landscape of how regulated units worked. And rent stabilized units, let's talk about stabilized, because that's more of a common, rent controlled was a long time ago. There's some rent controlled left, but not a lot. But on the rent stabilized side, every year you would get increases based on, general market conditions or CPI or whatever factors they were looking at that determine how much you could raise the rent every year. Also, when the tenant vacated, you would get, oftentimes feet first, as I say, in those kind of apartments, because the rent was so low that you weren't leaving unless it was feet first. But every time a tenant would leave, you would get a little vacancy bonus for the apartment of 20%. Also, if you renovated the apartment, you were incentivized because you would be able to get the rent up and hopefully at some point deregulate the unit. 2019 changed the game, and I'm just waiting for the other shoe to drop on the damage that this is going to cause to the real estate market here, because even if a landlord were to gut renovate a rent-stabilized apartment at this point, it's going to be permanently stabilized, and you can't get the rent above, you can't raise the rent more than $100-something.
See, that's very interesting that you bring up that point, because usually when a tenant moved out and the landlords had to renovate to put it back on the market, it went out as free market rent, whatever.
Correct.
Because they spent money on a renovation. Now you're saying, and I didn't know this, so thank you for the information, that it can still go out as rent stabilized after a renovation by the landlord?
Oh, absolutely. It's still going to be stabilized. And the amount you can raise the rent, before it used to be either $1 for every $40 you put in, you could raise the rent by $1 in some buildings, depending on size. Maybe it was $60 you put in, you could raise it $1. They took that away, and they didn't fully take it away, but they drastically limited it. So if I spent $100,000 renovating a rent-stabilized apartment, I could raise the rent about $100-something now. So how do it's going to bankrupt landlords. And if you look at...
So what keeps it as a stabilized apartment? And the reason I ask you is on TikTok, okay, and then a lot of other, social media apps, I see advertising by agents for rent-stabilized apartments. And I was always under the impression that once the original tenant left, and if it wasn't willed to somebody, it was renovated by the landlord and then put out as a free market rate apartment. How does it stay as a stabilized unit?
Well, like I just said, it's now permanently stabilized. So if it's a rent controlled, the old generation, then
it's
it goes...
It's not permanently, but it stays, right?
Right now it's permanently, so it stays a rent stabilized apartment. I can renovate it, but now the whole question with landlords is, if I had a tenant that lived there for 30, 40 years, and I have to spend $100,000 to renovate the apartment, and I can get back basically $100-something a month, how can I finance that renovation? Over the course of the year, I'm going to get back $1,200, and I spent $100,000. And if you look at the real deal, all of the multifamily landlords, they're all hurting because they can't afford to. I don't have $100,000 to renovate this apartment and raise the rent $100. And then on the stabilized, it's permanently stabilized. There used to be a cap. Once the apartment hit, let's call it $2,700, then you could deregulate the apartment. That's gone.
I have a friend who just lost his mom, unfortunately, and he was living with her at the end of her life for a couple of years now to kind of help her through, her disease. And he was just saying the other day that he's able to stay in that stabilized unit. You know, they have to change the name on the lease and all that good stuff, but it's a large apartment. She's been in it for, you know, however many years for very little money. And people would say, and I'm not, I mean, he's my friend and I understand the whole concept, but people would say out there, hey, you know, that would probably cost me $5,000 plus per month, and now you're going to be able to stay in it for $1,800, $1,900, whatever the number is. And in most places outside of New York City, $1,800 or $1,900 is a lot of money.
Yeah.
But here in New York City, it's robbing the bank.
Yeah,
okay?
Essentially, yeah.
So, you know, I look at the landlords, as you mentioned before, you know, literally, you know, putting them out of business. How do they do this?
Yeah, and look, in that particular case, if you showed like, you know, physical, emotion, financial dependency on whoever the actual tenant was, and you've lived in the apartment for, I think, 2 years before, then the lease can be passed on to you, you know, at the same rate. So that's probably how that situation's functioning, because it's a mom and the son. So that, you know, still remains stabilized and he can keep it. But now we have two different, you know, categories of people, like everybody paying the fair market, and now we have these like special deals for people on the stabilized side. And, you know, the travesty here is, you know, it's bankrupting everybody. Rent stabilized units just have to sit vacant because the average landlord doesn't have money to renovate the apartment and create another generation of stabilized tenancy. When I have to fully gut renovate it, I'm just stuck with the apartment and I can't do anything with it because it's in terrible shape to renovate. I don't have the cash, and I'm not going to get a rent increase. So what does the landlord do? And at what point do we have so much, you know, hurt and pain in New York City over this concept? Do they change the law? Because look, first it was rent controlled. Then they realized that wasn't working out for landlords. Then they passed the rent stabilization laws like way back in the day in the 70s. And then they're like, oh, we have to revise these because we're bankrupting everybody. And, you know, the city's just going down in quality. So at what point and how long does it take from when they enacted 2019 to when finally we revise these laws to something that is workable for both landlords and tenants?
Let's talk a little bit about renovations. Now, I know, you know, you're not in a lot of condos and co-ops, but on the rental side. But however, renovations have to happen from time to time. And when I'm selling a co-op or I'm selling a condo, oftentimes they're older apartments and the buyers coming in want to renovate. What are the particular rules and regulations around renovations in buildings here in New York? Again, it's not like renovating your home where you can have somebody come in at 3 o'clock in the morning or, you know, 2 in the afternoon to do whatever work is necessary. You got to conform to rules and regulations in a building.
Well,
right?
First of all, we all have to fill out basically a packet of information this size.
That looks like that.
Called an alteration agreement, which is essentially this size. Every building has...
And then some.
And then some. Every building has different requirements. Look, some of them are very well intended. Like, oh, we need this level of insurance. We need this level of liability. We want to see your plans. We want to make sure you have permits. We want our architect to review whatever you're doing to make sure that it's not going to impact the other residents in the building. Some of these buildings, and look, right now the high-end market is on fire, and we've seen all the headlines about it. Some of these buildings get really particular. Oh, you can only renovate your apartment in the summer when no one's here because we don't want the noise. So now I get to renovate my apartment in a 3-month increment, and then I basically get my 3 months. You sit dead in the water for another 9 months while we're waiting for summer to come again. So, you know, always check that. If you want to do renovations in the building, check it because, you know, look, some buildings have a quota on the amount of apartments that can be renovated at once.
Correct.
And we have a friend that just bought an apartment and she had to wait 6 months after her renovation was approved to start. So that's a very important thing. If you're going to have to do a major renovation, not just a paint job and a floor finishing, but upgrading the bathroom or kitchen, make sure you check the policy because that'll lead you to significant amounts of frustration if you didn't know in advance.
Do you know how many apartments, you know, in a day, in a week, in a year in New York City get renovated? I mean, everybody thinks about, well, that's very expensive. But, you know, in my experience, you know, most apartments I sell, whether it's a minor little touch-up to a major renovation, it goes on all the time.
Yeah, and it has to. And look, in the market today,
buildings are old.
Buildings are old. You know, New Yorkers have specific tastes here, you know, and the whole thing there...
New York taste.
They have their New York taste. You know, the whole thing there is, especially in today's market, everybody's busy, everybody's stressed out. We live in a different kind of world. Nobody wants to renovate. So if you look at apartments that are selling versus not selling, a lot of it comes down to how much work do I have to do, especially with increased construction material cost and labor. And just the overall process of renovation, people are intimidated. So they want a renovated product. So, it's becoming more and more common that people are even renovating before they sell it because otherwise you don't have a real product. Nobody wants to sign up for a project right now.
I renovated a couple of apartments in my buys and sells through the years here in New York City. And I have to tell you something, it is not a convenient thing to do. In one instance, I decided to live in the apartment while they were renovating.
You won't make that mistake twice.
Never. I did my kitchen, I did my bathroom, I built this wall unit in the living room. We did the floors. I mean, it was, I'd walk in every night and there was plastic hanging over here, and they made me a little walkway into the bedroom, the only room that wasn't touched. And I thought, sawdust on all my suits, all my clothes.
Everywhere.
In my shoes. It's like, I will never do this again.
And you're also making the renovation more expensive and take longer because the guys want to come in, they want to get their job done, and 100%. They want to get out. They don't want to have to make you a maze to get to your bedroom and have to clean up in a certain way so you can live there. Like, you're just slowing down the job and making it more expensive. And every couple of
days they say, how much longer we got to go? And they're like, Vince, go to work.
Yeah.
Go to work, okay?
You do that one time and you don't do it again.
It's going to take I will never do that again. The other times I stay with a friend or whatever. You talked a little bit before we get into the whole moving stuff, you talked a little bit before about, the higher end, rent-wise, dollar-wise, is getting higher and higher. The demand is what it is. The inventory is not so great, but renters are still out there more than buyers are. What is the average price these days in your buildings or buildings you manage for a one-bedroom or a two-bedroom, or just in general?
I mean, it's really coming up. And look, a lot of the rent thing is in relation to the interest rate problem. Interest rates are high. People don't want to buy because they don't want to, sell their apartment when they had a, low mortgage and get a higher one. So a lot of it's in relation to interest rates, but also inflation of everything. It became very popular. People, especially with tax laws in Florida and Texas, it made it much more appealing for them to have established full-time residency there. People were selling their New York apartments and they were becoming tenants, and they go back and forth between a better, situated tax state versus here. And that drove up the high end a lot because, look, if you made a lot of money, you're like, oh, I can sell my apartment because we want to make our case as clean as possible, that I don't live in New York. And no, I don't own, I'm just renting something where I can stay and go to meetings. And I think that had a big impact on high-end rents as well. But, I used to be a $30,000 apartment was, wow, a $30,000 apartment, that was kind of the ceiling of it. And then it became $50,000. And I mean, now we regularly rent apartments that are, more than $100,000 a month.
Anybody outside of New York who listens to this, who watches this, or that you just talk to friends. And, when I mentioned to my family who lives and not even an hour north of the city, and very New York City, aware, but when they hear prices like this, they say, $25,000 for an apartment? Why?
Yeah, they say why.
Who would do that? And I always say, listen, there's always something for everybody. And in New York City, people make a lot of money, for the most part.
The finance guys.
Exactly. And they're the ones who are out there buying the bigger apartments and renting. But also what people say today, and they've said this in my entire 23-year career, if someone is willing to pay that kind of rent, why wouldn't they buy?
Why don't they just buy?
I mean, it used to be a very logical question, right? Today, I understand the interest rate, but when you put all your monthly costs together, I'm sure you're still going to be under $25,000 a month. I mean, or $30,000 a month, whatever it is, right? So people still say to me, why would they rent and not buy? You
know what it really is? It's the opportunity cost of the capital. Because if you want to, first of all, this $30,000 a month apartment, what's that going to sell for? Now we're talking $8-10 million in cash in some cases. Or if you get a mortgage, I mean, look, you still have to put at least 20-30% down.
Absolutely.
Could you make more money on that $3 million and just pay $30,000 a month or whatever it is for rent? And that's the way everybody's looking at it. Because I hear it over and over again. Why would you just buy if you were going to spend $10,000, $20,000, whatever the number is? But it's opportunity cost of capital. Also, sometimes the person doesn't know if they're going to be in New York permanently.
Thank you.
Sometimes you're just here for a year or two. You're shooting a movie. Right. You've taken a job that has a contract period, or you're working for the UN, or sometimes you don't want to be permanently situated in New York.
That's a very good point, and I wanted to ask you about that because that is absolutely 100% true. There are people who come in and out of this town all the time. I mean, my first rental way back 23 years ago was a walk-in to my office on the Upper West Side, and they wanted to rent an apartment for just 1 year because their husband, they were coming over from Asia, and he was like second or third in command at Citibank at the time. And they wanted an apartment, and their budget then was $25,000 or $30,000 a month because they wanted a grand, they had 2 or 3 kids, whatever. And I found them something, but 23 years ago, I thought, wow, 20, I think it turned out to be $25,000 a month. Holy cow, right? And I would say to friends, why would they do that? And the answer back, I was a brand new agent, right? And the answer back was exactly what you just said. They're going to be here for a year. They don't care. They're not going to buy here. And they need something sizable, so they were willing to spend that kind of money. It just, even for me, after all of these years, I guess I can say, it still blows my mind.
Yeah.
But not only on the rental side, but even some of the prices we have on the sales side. I mean, it completely blows my mind.
I remember back in 2004, where I was working for a developer and I worked on this condo building, and it was when the plaza was being converted to condos, and we started talking about like the $2,000 to $3,000 a foot price point, and people were up in arms about like, how can this be? New York is too expensive. And now you look, how long ago was that? 20 years later,
20 years.
We're looking at some, apartments selling for $10,000 a foot. I mean, prices really escalated in a very quick manner, which is why everybody's upset. But what do you do at this point? And that's goes back to the rent laws of, let's like stop, rental growth, and let's protect the tenants, because of these rapidly increasing prices. But you're protecting the tenants, but then you're just bankrupting the landlord, which is in return going to hurt the tenant. So we keep trying to enact this socialist legislation, but it's not helping anyone. And by the way, it's just making prices more expensive. We talked about the broker fee, but that's on the horizon. Landlords might have to pay it. That's another populist.
June 11th.
But it's another populist, law, because landlords don't have the extra 8.3% in their pockets anymore. No. And what happens on no-fee rentals? That's been a concept for years. Okay, fine. We're not going to charge you the broker fee. You'll just pay it through the rent, and therefore rents just go up.
I think that whole broker thing, and we're not going to get into it today because we've already exhausted it on the show, but I think that whole rental commission fee payment nonsense is going to be a big problem.
Oh, a disaster.
Because I don't think landlords can, as you just said, really afford it in most cases. They can't.
Especially with all this increased cost. Insurance, fuel, you talked about the heat. Part of that heat problem is wanting to save costs.
Are they willing then to rent their own apartments?
How can they? A lot of, they have lives to live. They don't want to be brokers. Like you need a middleman, and the answer, look, some probably will try to. But is that going to get them highest and best value out of their apartment? Like, we have brokers for a reason, and...
Might they come to you?
I don't do any renting direct. I know that. Oh, they'll come to me, and then we're going to encourage them. You need a broker to handle the rental listing. Excel, doesn't operate as a brokerage firm. And by the way, even if we did, someone's still going to pay that fee.
Absolutely.
Someone, on whatever team, still has to show the apartment. They still have to collect applications. They still have to run comps. Could you imagine like a fragmented system where there was no centralized broker system and broker platform to help?
And credit and background checks and all that stuff.
All of it.
That's all costly.
All of it. Just showing the apartment. I mean...
That's why I said I think it's going to be a disaster. Let's talk about noise, okay, for a minute or two. I mean, we live in New York City. We don't live in our own private house. Noise can be an issue. People, being obnoxious or not respectful of their neighbors. Is always an issue. And when you first move into New York or you move into a building, you don't know you don't know who your neighbors are really. I'll give you a personal example, okay? I live in the 10th floor of my apartment, and up one above me, the 11th floor, I've had about 3 different people in there, okay, over the 23 years. And they've all been bad, meaning noisy. This last group, I think they're a couple. In fact, they are, because the doorman told me a month ago, moved in about October, November of last year, so only a few months. I'm ready to kill. The stomping and the pounding. I mean, I say to the doorman, are they 500 pounds each? He doesn't answer me because I think they are. Boom, boom, boom. And yet last night, I'm getting ready to go to bed. And the pounding on the bedroom, I wanted to scream out loud or go upstairs and ring their doorbell. What the, what? I don't get it. There used to be a rule with 80% of the apartment needs to be carpeted. These people would still pound on carpeting, okay? What is it about noise in a building or people's lack of sensitivity that they just don't care? You must hear the complaints all the time.
Oh, we hear it all the time. And look, noise is always a tricky
I'm over
subject for us because it's also that individual's tolerance for noise. Look, and also, tenants should prepare for, when they're looking for an apartment where they're going to live based on, the noise factor. I've got 3 small kids, and my dream right now, we live right above a retail space that's very busy. And my dream, I remember we looked at this like co-op apartment and the broker was like, look, the owner doesn't want to take you because it was been building and you guys, are heavy users. And we looked at each other like, heavy users, you make us sound like, addicts or something. It's like, no, like it's a lot of commotion in the apartment. And she was right because then we found a new apartment and it's right above a CVS and our kids can pound and do whatever kids do as much as they want. And we don't have to, there's no one to yell at us about it. But noise is always tricky for us because some people are very sensitive to noise. Some people don't care at all. And sometimes I found the person upstairs isn't actually being disrespectful. You just don't want any noise, and sometimes that's not possible.
Maybe the word is they're just not aware. And we all know, even walking on the street, people are not aware. La, la, la. They walk into you. They step on your shoes. I mean, they do it. They're just not aware. So maybe they're not being disrespectful on purpose, but they just don't give a shit. Okay, they don't care.
But also that's when, like, when you move into the building, you make friends with the neighbors above you, below you, to the left, to the right. That way we can have like a healthy adult communication.
To say hello, because when I go upstairs to say hello, after 3 or 4 months of all what I'm going through, it ain't going to be nice.
But maybe they don't know. Maybe they don't know that it's disturbing. I mean, sometimes they do and they disregard it. But if you went up there with bake them some cookies, I see that you love to cook. You could bake them a nice, pasta dinner
Enjoy
for
my
Sunday.
treats and please
by
stop
the way,
stomping on my head every night.
Put the pogo stick down. Like we don't need that in the apartment. Start with that because we oftentimes get drug into it as a management company. And,
of course.
And a lot of times it can be resolved just with neighborly, communication. I don't want to impact someone's life if I don't have to, or if it's not sometimes it's not my fault. It's an old building, and no matter what you do, if you're shoeless, if you're not running, if you're not have a trampoline in the living room. Like, sometimes people just don't know.
But you know what? I've had kids on top of me, upstairs, and they've been fine. They're little kids. I mean, so they drop something or whatever. That is not disturbing. It's when you pound and pound the way people walk.
Yeah.
And I've never seen people walking around their own apartment so much in a few hours. Where are you
going?
Where are they going?
Where are you
It's
going?
a 1-bedroom apartment. Where are you going? What are you doing? Boom, 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 boom. I'm like, what the hell? Sit down in a chair. And when they finally do sit down, I'm like, oh my God. I have 10 minutes of a break.
It feels like it's going to crash to the floor.
We got to take a break. We're running over. Very quick break. This is Talking New York Real Estate on the More Network. We're coming back. Don't go anywhere.
What do you really need to know about buying or selling a home? First, it's serious business. And it's complicated. There's a lot of money on the table, and emotion too. You need an agent who knows the ropes. So, whether you're buying or selling your home, work with professionals who have a mastery of the craft.
We are back with Dylan. All right, so Dylan, let me ask you, before we get into the move, we keep saying that, but talk a little bit about the building's policies on pets, on guests, and on subletting.
Right. Well,
because all of those 3 things can become an issue in most buildings. There are some buildings that don't allow pets. Certainly co-ops don't allow subletting. Some rentals do and don't. And guests, I mean, tell us about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, the pet one is kind of a difficult one because the building can have an official policy on it. Right. But if you start, claiming your pet as an emotional support animal, and it's gotten very vague about what that means.
Okay.
And, we even saw on the airplane, I remember somebody brought their emotional support peacock on the plane with them as a joke, which was not funny.
I've actually seen that.
Yeah, and, so pets became kind of complicated. We want to honor the building's rules. Look, if the building doesn't like pets and everybody's going to have animosity towards you about the pet, you might want to reconsider, is that where I want to be? And,
Right. But the problem is, when you first move in, you don't know.
You don't know.
And if there's a pet policy, great, I have a pet, or not, you move in, fine. Then all of a sudden, down the hall, there's a barking dog that never stops barking, or above you or below you, and it becomes an issue. Talk about noise. Pet noise can be just as irritating,
especially
right?
the barking.
Right. If you're moving into a non-pet building, okay, there's not going to be an issue, or when you get in the elevator, there's not going to be another dog. I'm a pet-friendly person. I had a pet for 17 years. So when I get in the elevator and someone comes in with a dog, I love every minute of it.
Yeah.
Hey, and I'm petting the dog and talking to I love that. It doesn't bother me. But there were people who were bugged by pets in an elevator. And one building I lived in, and it was a co-op on the Upper East Side. If you wanted to walk your dog, you had to use the service elevator, not the passenger elevator.
Right. Look, and that, it depends on the building. I mean, I'm a dog lover. I'm a big, golden doodle, and, he's part of our family, and I would, get rid of the kids before getting rid of the dog.
Oh, yeah.
But at the end of the day, I want a pet-friendly building. But some buildings are very rigorous, and like I said, you can have as many policies as you want about the pets, but if they start claiming emotional support animal and you say, no, we're not going to let you do it, or no, you can't move here, then now you have a discrimination case you're looking at. So that's a complicated one. Subletting condo and co-op buildings, they don't want you to sublet the apartment. And honestly, me as a landlord, I don't want you subletting either. In 2019, they also passed that new law, duty to mitigate damages. I like that better because we have a clean break in a lot of ways. I don't want to deal with the subtenant and undertenant. And if something goes wrong with the undertenant to the subtenant, now we have this whole triangle of, litigation. Like it's complicated, on that front. And then subletting, nobody really wants you to sublet, like especially in
well, co-ops, there are strict rules about it, right? But in
condos as well.
Condos are getting there, yes, but you're still a lot more flexible. But what about on the rental side? I have to leave my city for a year for whatever reason. I got to go off and do a special assignment with my work. But can I sublet my rental apartment for a year?
Yeah, look, as a landlord, we
and
don't
landlord
want you to
is
do
okay
it.
with that?
I mean, we don't really like that because when we
But can they stop you from doing that?
We have in our lease that you're not allowed to sublet. And if you need to get out of the lease, we're happy to, honor duty to mitigate damages. But when I'm a landlord, I accepted you as my tenant. I didn't accept whatever else.
Right.
I don't know what your story is. And
now, who does the subletter, the subletter, if it can happen in the building, who do they pay the rent to? The actual person who has the lease, and then they pay the company, or do they pay their rent directly to the company?
It really depends on how it's set up. In some cases, it's to the subtenant, and the subtenant pays us. In some cases, we'll let people let the undertenant pay the rent directly. But traditionally, it would be the subtenant paying the landlord still, and the subtenant getting the rent money from the undertenant. But it makes it complicated. And what if something goes wrong with your undertenant? Then it's you're an amateur landlord that's doing it for convenience to not, lose a lot of money by having to terminate the lease or, wait till the landlord finds somebody. Like, you're creating a lot of risk for yourself as someone trying to sublet your apartment. You're now a New York City landlord.
Because correct, and I'm thinking about damage. They come in, who knows what they're going to do, and then when they leave, you either have to fix it or, report it to the landlord. I mean, it could be a sticky thing.
What if they don't pay you rent?
And what if they don't pay me rent? Now, as you say,
now you're a landlord.
Now I'm
and
a
you've
landlord.
got a victim, and now I still expect my rent. Like, it creates people don't
absolutely.
realize how much risk they're signing up for when they do it.
They don't. Talk to me about smoking policies in buildings, most especially smoking weed, which is now legal in New York City.
Yes. The minute that was passed and it became legal, it created a whole host of problems for us as landlords. And look, it's important that every building adopts a no smoking policy because we all live together. There's nothing worse, and we hear it time and time again, especially sometimes in stabilized units where we have a new tenant move in and now they're upset because the guy's smoking cigarettes or the woman's smoking cigarettes. You're really impacting. I don't like the smoking thing in the building because you're now impacting somebody else's right to quietly enjoy their property. And maybe you're really offended by cigarette smoke. Maybe you're really offended by pot smoke. And we oftentimes have to get involved in these
there
disputes.
is a difference between cigarette smoke and pot smoke.
Well, it depends. It depends on who you're talking to. Some people are very, anti-pot smoke as well. And luckily in today's world, we have these other products called vapes. So if you're a smoker and you demand a smoke in the apartment, at least get a vape. Like, don't make your smoking somebody else's problem. And go get a vaporizer for weed or for nicotine, whatever you need.
But again, as we talked about before, with the noise and the walking and the whatever, are people aware of? Do people really care? I smoked for 20 years. I haven't smoked in 30 years. I mean, not even a little bit, not even a cheat, nothing. When I gave it up finally after 20 years, I said, I am done. And I moved into the city 30 years ago, and one of the apartments I owned was in a very fancy building on Central Park West. And the neighbors next door to me, whenever you got off the elevator, it was one of these buildings that had like 3 or 4 different banks. So when you get off my elevator bank, there was only 3 apartments on the floor. And so I was in the middle. There was one on the end and then one right across from me. The one on the end, which their walls, were behind my walls, they smoked cigarettes, and they must have been smoking one after the other all day.
The whole building
all night.
smells like it.
The whole floor stunk of it. When I went into my apartment, it literally would seep through my walls.
Yeah.
And I had just quit, a couple of years before that. And I thought, I'm not the complaining type. I don't, whatever. But I couldn't take it. It was unbelievable.
Yeah, and that's the problem with it.
It was It was nonstop.
And for your resale value. I mean, there's nothing worse. You're having an open house. You have all these buyers show up, and they, the elevator door is broken, open, and all of a sudden they feel like they're in a Cheech and Chong movie. You're like, I only
lived there a little over a year, and the only reason that building is quite amazing still is because I couldn't deal with that. And they were an older couple, didn't look like they were going to be going anywhere anytime fast. And I thought about that. I had just become a real estate agent, so I listed that apartment on my own, for sale by owner, broker owner. And I was always concerned about that for open. I mean, I sold it in a week because the building is just amazing. I don't know what they thought of after they moved in,
right?
The theme of our show today, but it was annoying. Now, with marijuana being legal, even when it wasn't, I work in a building in Midtown West, and I have for many, many years. And I can't tell you how many times I show up to do a showing on a particular floor, wherever my listing happens to be, and it's like, holy cow, the weed smell is off the charts.
And it lingers.
And this is before it was legal. Now it's like free-for-all. So there are people who want to come in to look at a building, but they are so adverse to that odor, they're not going to do it.
Yeah.
They're going to run for the hills. How do you stop that?
People started, now when people want to buy or rent, they start confirming whether or not the building has a no smoking policy. Most buildings, I would say, have them now. Some still don't have them, but now it's part of the criteria.
Can you actually stop people from smoking in their apartment?
I mean, it's objectionable conduct, and if it's a non-smoking building,
this building has a non-smoking rule the last 2 years, hasn't changed anything.
The problem is, how do you enforce it? Is a building willing to throw? At some point, if it doesn't stop based on you just asking them to stop,
I'm sure the super gets a lot of complaints. Who was supposed to be here today, but had to cancel at the last minute. But I'm sure he gets a lot of complaints.
Yeah, and ultimately the landlord or the owner or the neighbors have to decide, like, is this issue important enough for me to start litigating over it? Because, if they're not complying with polite requests or threats of fines, whatever policy they have, like, do I want to litigate this? And the answer is probably not. You're throwing a lot of money at it, and you've got to, just keep finding the people. And people kind of balk when you put fines on condo and co-ops, but when they don't balk is when you want to get your right of first refusal or your, permission to close, and they say, oh, by the way, you owe $12,000 in non-smoking fines. We're not approving this until you pay it. But that's more of a patience game.
When I was still smoking, when I was still living in the suburbs, I had bought my first condo there before I moved into the city. I never smoked in my apartment.
Yeah.
I went outside. It's gross. And I was a smoker.
Yeah.
But people who would come in with or I didn't like the smell, so I went outside and smoked.
You don't want to live in an ashtray,
No, but again, people really don't care. Let's talk about the whole move process in the few minutes we have left. So, from a building management perspective, you see things, you hear things, whatever, and our mover wasn't able to make it today as well. But there's a whole process to moving, from the end user side, the packing, the whatever, figuring all that out, the expense of moving. But once you get into a building, there are all kinds of elevator issues, potentially, insurance that's needed, because if a mover does damage to the walls or the floors or whatever, someone's got to pay the cost of repair on that. And also, when movers move people into their units, there's damage to the floors, sometimes damage to the walls. What's the whole drama with moving? Because it always seems to turn out to be some sort of drama.
Oftentimes, unexpected drama. I mean, the moving truck breaks down, the mover didn't show up, the mover broke your grandmother's vase, things like that. And, people, it's another thing people need to be clear about when they're signing the lease or buying the apartment. What are the rules for moving in? Every building has hours you're allowed to do it. A lot of buildings don't allow weekend moves.
Right.
A lot of times you have to sign up for the elevator in advance because they have limited capacity.
100%.
We just had a story yesterday where a tenant, is upset because he wants to move into a 90-story tower, and he has two.
Why?
200 boxes being delivered. He's like, I need the building to shut down
200?
200. I don't know why 200. It's a big apartment, but that sounds like a lot of boxes. And he's like, I need them to shut down the elevator exclusive for me for a day or two. It's like, no, they can't do that. Like, the building has other building affairs going on. They have renovations. They're not going to be able to do it. And the tenant's very upset. It's like, but on what planet do you think that the building can shut down their one service elevator for you? Like, there's a lot of people that need to use it. And now we've got to stagger the move over days. So check out those policies before you do it.
How long does it take, for example, for somebody moving into a floor, an apartment on the 90th floor or wherever, even a 10th floor, when they have that much stuff to move in? You can't, as you say, close down an elevator for days. You can't do it.
You can't. So you've got to expect a long, protracted move, and you're going to have to break it up because I'm sure inevitably, like on one of those, people are renovating their apartments. So those guys have to use the elevators as well. People, on a lot of buildings, any staff, like, cleaning staff or dog walkers, they have to use the elevators, service elevator. If you have a guy with a bike, he's going to use the service elevator. Like, so you got to be realistic about what the building can and can't do to accommodate you.
Correct. And so I hear stories sometimes where certain pieces of furniture don't fit in an elevator. When you're still in your original
that's the worst. You show up with your couch, you try to get in the door.
And they're trying to dismantle things in the hallway or the lobby. It's like, whoa. And they have to walk furniture upstairs. Now, I've heard, stories where people live on higher floors. Can you imagine taking an armoire all the way up 10, 15, 20 floors?
Though sometimes the elevator breaks, and that's frustrating as well.
Well, that too, but if it doesn't fit in the elevator and it can't really be
You've got to carry it
disassembled.
up. And there's a whole business. I'm sure you've heard of these guys, couch doctors, and their whole business model is waiting for you to try and shove your restoration hardware into the front door of your new apartment. And then, you can't fit it in? That'll be $1,000, but I'll be there in 2 hours. And you now have no choice but
I
for
had
them
a
to take it
client
apart.
one day call me after the move and said, you know what? Moving was not fun.
Yeah.
And my sofa wouldn't fit in the elevator. And she wasn't on the high floor. But the mover said to her, we're going to just take your sofa apart. We can see that it can be dismantled. And she said, what do you mean? They took the back off, they took the arms off, they took the legs off, and they put everything in the elevator. She was horrified. And it got into her apartment. They put it all back together again. She said, I didn't even know that this sofa could be dismantled.
Oh, they're experts. You look at it and
she said they knew exactly what to do.
Did.
She had no, and I've seen it since. She's a friend of mine. And I'm like, Linda, where did they take the sofa apart? She said, don't even ask.
Yeah.
Everything was taken apart. I'm like, okay. But
Always measure
I'm looking
first.
Exactly, but I'm looking at or couldn't fit in the doorway. There was a whole bunch of issues. But I'm looking at these big armoires, and I have 3 of them in my apartment. How do they do that?
It takes it takes patience. I would pre-plan that
You're
kind of
not gonna
stuff
take
because
apart my
there's
armoire.
nothing worse than you've been moving for 8 straight hours. Moving's never fun, right? Parking.
No,
They show up late.
no.
They were too rough. Whatever. That you can't find a box that they were helping to move. But there's nothing worse, and it's 4 o'clock. The building's about to close the building for the day, and you learn that your sofa doesn't fit in, and now it's a whole nother process where you're already exhausted. You regret the day you ever signed the lease or signed the deed for the apartment. It's never fun. So don't make it more stressful. Please,
It's never fun. It's never, and I've moved multiple times. It's just one of the things that I've done through the year. I haven't in the last 20 years, but I mean, I used to move all the time because sell the apartment, buy a new one, sell the apartment, whatever. Those days are gone. But because I couldn't deal with moving.
Yeah.
Because moving is a nightmare. And when I look around my current apartment and what I have currently, I think, now you have 3 armoires.
Yeah.
Now you have a large sofa. Now, I mean, I can go on and on and on. A dining table, a kitchen table, a desk. I mean, a bedroom filled with furniture. And people walk in and say, oh, your apartment's lovely. I'm like, don't look too close.
Yeah, don't look too close.
Because there's a lot of stuff that I don't need. But, through the years, you just, oh, well, I can't get rid of it. But on move day, it becomes a nightmare.
It becomes a nightmare, and sometimes you're just going to take a sledgehammer to that stuff, and you're going to buy it new. And I think probably half the time tenant renew the lease just because they're still in therapy from like the last move, and they're like, I'm not doing that again. I'm not doing that for a long, long time because it's such a draining day.
We have a minute left, but talk a little bit about the insurance requirement when people move into a building. It's something called the COI, Certificate of Insurance. And I was sitting in a lobby last night doing open house, and a rug cleaner came in, and the doorman said, where's your COI? And he looked and said, I don't have one.
Yeah.
Do you realize how expensive that is? I don't need one. So he was getting testy. So I'm sitting in the chair waiting for my customers to come. So I looked at him and I said, sir, calm down. He's just asking you a question.
Yeah.
Calm down. So I said to the doorman, call the super and see what the super might be able to do. I mean, he's coming in to clean a carpet in the apartment. What is he going to do? And if he damages something, it's a condo. The owner has insurance,
The
right?
owner has it. Yeah, but also people get really tested about it. Some buildings are strict. I mean,
They're very strict.
If I want to fix a window shade at 220 Central Park South, I have to have a vendor with
$220.
$5 million umbrella policy for liability. It's like, this guy's going to come fix like one shade. Like,
Yeah, oh, I know.
And I mean, look, insurance is important. It protects everybody. If the mover damages it, you want to be able to prove that they have their own insurance, so there's no issue. But also, that's what drives up costs. And when you start talking about companies with a $5 million umbrella and workers' comp and all these expensive insurance policies, that drives up the cost for that vendor, and that's why all these prices end up so out of control.
Oh, absolutely.
But it's necessary.
But while he was still heated, he kept saying, but you don't understand how much it costs. Remember, I said he's a doorman. He
doesn't care.
He doesn't care. He doesn't know he's doing his job.
Yeah.
So they called the super. He called the super, and the super said, let him in.
Yeah.
And I said, you see, all you have to do is calm down. He called the super, who I know very well. Just, he let you in.
But that's why you have to be friends with the super. When you move in, the super needs your best friend, because if it's building policy
He
and
probably
the vendor
asked
didn't
what
comply,
apartments you're going to.
you can easily say, you know what, you go get a COI and we'll see you next time, and there's nothing you can do about it.
But I learned something last night when he yapped about how expensive getting insurance is. Every time I have to go into a building, you don't understand what it costs me. I'm like, I guess I don't. But if that's the policy, that's the policy.
What can you do? The board
This is
decided
New
that's
York
the
City,
policy.
the greatest city in the world, right? It comes with a cost. And on that note, we're out of time. So that's a wrap. We'll see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, it's Stephen Bailey from Roadway Moving and Storage. Listening to Vince Rocco, you hear a lot about how crucial it is to have the right partners in this industry. At Roadway, we don't just move your clients, we give them an experience they'll love. Specialized services to our white glove treatment, it's all about making sure your clients feel taken care of every step of the way. And if you're looking for a rewarding referral program, reach out to me at steven@roadwaymoving.com or visit roadwaymoving.com.
All right, everybody, we are back with my thoughts for this week. Moving in New York City can be an incredible, stressful experience filled with logistical hurdles like coordinating with the building's managing agent, securing elevator reservations, dealing with strict move-in policies, and navigating congested city streets with movers. The process can feel overwhelming as you juggle packing, unpacking, unexpected delays, and setting up utilities while ensuring compliance with building rules. However, once that last box is unpacked and you start settling into your new home, a sense of relief sets in and you adjust to daily life, getting to know the super, the door staff, neighbors, and making that transition even smoother. The managing agent becomes an essential point of contact for any building-related issues, from maintenance requests to amenity access. Soon, the stress of moving fades, replaced by the excitement of making the space your own and enjoying the unique rhythm of New York City living here in my town. And that's our broadcast for today. Thanks to my guests for being here on set with me. You can follow me on Facebook, on Threads, Instagram, LinkedIn, Blue Sky, or TikTok at Vince Rocco. And Einstein once said, compound interest is the eighth wonder of the world. He who understands it earns it. He who doesn't pays it. And from all of us here at Talking New York Real Estate and the More Network, to all of you all around the world, thanks for spending a part of your day with us. I am grateful, and I will see you next time. Goodbye, everybody.